Welcome to the Bucket Plan on Demand, a podcast for financial advisors based on the best-selling book and process that simplifies financial planning. Hear from skilled industry professionals and special guests each episode that will help perfect your approach with clients and your results.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bucket Plan on Demand. I am your host today, Chief Marketing Officer Matt Seitz at C2P and Prosperity Capital Advisors. A very timely topic today, bringing clarity to AI-influenced clients. And for that, we kind of have a little flip of the script for today. Your normal host, Dave Alison, is joining us as our subject matter expert for today. Dave is a distinguished wealth manager and entrepreneur who is founder and CEO of his own firm, Alison Wealth Management, as well as president and founding partner of C2P and Prosperity Capital Advisors. A well-known thought leader in the industry and specialist in serving high net worth and ultra high net worth clients, Dave has received numerous accolades and awards throughout his career. Thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Yeah, Matt, looking forward to chatting about AI influence with you.
Yeah, and when I mentioned the kind of flipping the sides for today, it's because Dave has had this topic come up numerous times. We were just chatting last week about this, and it happening more and more, coming up with clients and prospects that Dave is meeting with. And we've talked a lot about the AI tools that we have available to each of our advisors, and thought, hey, let's address this head on and present some of these things that are happening more and more to educate all of you, as well as some tips for potentially how to overcome some of these challenges that come from the AI side, especially on the client and prospect side. So Dave, let's jump in with that. What have you seen yourself? I know you mentioned some of those to me last week, but sharing for our audience today that you've heard from other advisors in terms of ChatGPT-generated misconceptions from clients and prospects.
Well, I think that's the key, right? It's being prepared, because I think we are entering kind of a new realm of the advisor-client relationship, and clients have so much information and potential expertise at their fingertips now with these LLMs, ChatGPT, Gemini. I mean, again, think about, you go to Google today, and the first thing you see isn't necessarily 20 or 30 links to go click and research information. It's their kind of deep think helping provide an AI-generated response. And so I am starting to see that clients are using these tools to help augment their own financial advice that maybe they're getting from us. And that could be like a new potential client researching who the financial advisor in the area is. I know, Matt, you've talked a lot about, marketing and making sure that like ChatGPT is telling your story the right way. But then what I've seen throughout the planning process is that when we're sharing ideas and concepts with clients today, in many cases, they're going online and they're researching through these LLMs like ChatGPT or others, the things that we're talking to them about. And I think we've all seen this, is that while these tools are amazing, in many cases, they hallucinate or they just don't provide the right relevant information. I mean, taxes are a big area of that. I can't tell you how many errors and mistakes I see in the tax advice that comes from some of these AI tools. And so I think as advisors, kind of this new era that we need to be prepared for is how to overcome objections that are going to arise from our clients taking the advice or the recommendations or the strategies that we're educating them on and going to ChatGPT or some other LLM and maybe getting some contradictory information or not understanding the full perspective of like how these things fit for the client and are in the best interest of the client. And the second side of it is like, how do we counter just flat out misinformation that these things are projecting to our clients? I think, Matt, how this all came up is when we were all together in Cleveland last week. I think just in that week alone, I had 3 clients send me ChatGPT conversations on different financial planning elements. One was like paying for, saving, and funding college education for a child. The other one was on charitable remainder trust. The third one was on like some kind of leveraged solar investment that creates this huge tax deduction. And so I think like the pace of information that's going to get thrown at us as advisors is going to increase greatly.
So you mentioned they're doing their homework and their, fact checking or whatever you want to call it, whether the information is correct or not. But how can advisors professionally deal with that in the moment?
Well, I know what I've started to do, and it's been a big help for me, is be a little bit more proactive. Like if I'm going into a client scenario where I'm making a recommendation or I'm brainstorming on their planning or their strategy, a lot of times I'm going into Chat GPT and I'm outlining what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm giving it a lot of context. I'm giving it all the details. I'm giving it my recommendations or solutions. And then I'm asking it to potentially think of any challenges or any counterpoints or any objections that the client might have. And then what I'm doing is I'm asking it to help me communicate this to the client and why it aligns with X, Y, or Z. And so, again, I think if you can do things like that on the front end, it will help provide a lot more clarity and communication for the client in terms of why we're doing the things that we're doing. Maybe it could formulate a really great email for you to provide the client so that they can read it. And if the client takes that email then and uploads it to their own, AI tool, it's going to have a lot more context and clarity. And so that's one thing that's just been really helpful. I mean, I feel like I've been using these tools now to formulate almost any client communication that I send out. Of course, like it's not like if a client sends an email saying like, hey, I need a $10,000 distribution, I'm not doing it there. But like the big picture strategy, the things that, I'm sharing with the client that I believe they should implement. I can't tell you more times than not, I'm running those through AI just as an additional thought partner.
Well, and Dave, could you speak to too, because I love what you're talking about, being proactive with it. It's just like they tell you in PR, control the messaging, when you're letting them go and do it on their end, but you can do it on your end. The other power with that is I know what you've done, with your firm and with Prosperity Capital Advisors, loading as much information as you can into your Chat GPT so that when you are putting client information, not the PII, but their example in there, that it actually knows more about your firm and can speak to the differentiators there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the more you can train, these things to understand the things that you deal with on a regular basis, the more powerful the solution is for you. The other side of it is even when clients, let's say they take some sort of like Chat GPT conversation on a recommendation or an idea. I've had many times where they'll send that back to me and say like, hey, Dave, I plugged this in, like, this is what it came up with. And, what I've started to experience is like, don't take that as a threat. Like they're just doing their homework. I think most of us would do something similar, knowing that we have these incredibly intelligent solutions at our fingertips. And, I'll share, hey, Matt, I'm glad you did that. That's great that you're proactively kind of thinking about this and it's important to you. The one thing that I've seen with these tools is they really don't have all the context of what's going on in your financial life to actually guide you to the exact right scenario. And quite honestly, in some cases, they just give flat out wrong information. And so, here's what I would say. If we take the context of what you shared with me, I want to give you a few edits to that I think could help guide you in the right direction, right? Because like I just had this happen where my client sent me their whole Chat GPT conversation. And guess what I did? I took that whole conversation and I uploaded it in my Chat GPT. And then I provided the expertise that I have to tell them where it was wrong or misguiding them. And I'd say, hey, here's 5 points that Chat GPT got wrong in thinking about this scenario for my client. help me construct this framework and then provide communication to the client. So again, like it doesn't have to be me sitting there for hours analyzing it. I can use the same tool because Matt, one of the things you and I've spoke about so much is like whenever I think about using ChatGPT or any other AI, it's like a game of ping pong or tennis. It's like you have to just keep hitting the ball back and forth to each other for a while to get to what that right outcome is. And a lot of times our clients will go in and they'll just type in like almost like a Google search into ChatGPT, and it doesn't even come close to providing them the right context.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good leader into the next question too, is when that happens, and you kind of touched on this a little bit in your story there, but have you found certain communication techniques work better when speaking with a client or prospect there, when they do have information that maybe the ChatGPT or whatever AI was hallucinating and maybe didn't give the proper information? They may be under the understanding that that is correct, but the specific of how you point that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, not attacking the information because they don't want it to be like, oh, well, it says this and you said this. And so you're going to get defensive of your recommendation, but just like helping bring perspective around it. I was actually on a meeting with Dave Buchwald on a large life insurance case he was advising on for one of our ultra high net worth clients at Prosperity Capital Advisors. And I thought he did a really good job. This client's one of the top oncologists in the United States. And she had kind of put all of the recommendations that we were making into ChatGPT. And ChatGPT came back with some misinformation, actually misinformation to the upside on what we were recommending. Like it basically shared some of the pricing in the product that we were recommending was actually a lot better than what it really is. And of course, we didn't want that either. Now, that supported our case of why we were doing what we were doing, but it probably would have also set some unrealistic expectations. And so again, like Dave came back and said, number one, like, hey, I wish it was that good, but I want to bring your expectations down a little bit. It's not correct. And he goes, Stephanie, in your role as an oncologist, how many times in the last 3, 4, 5 months have patients gone into ChatGPT, told them all their symptoms or about their cancer or about what they're experiencing, and come back with a recommendation list? And she goes, oh, that drives me nuts. It's wrong half the time. And we're like, yeah, like, the same situation is going on here. But it's great that you're proactively thinking about this and analyzing these situations, but we also want to make sure your expectations are aligned properly.
I love that you guys address that in a way that got her to back into that and realize, like, sometimes you use those analogies to put someone else in the perspective of, you don't have to tell them that it's incorrect or that they might be going down the wrong path, but they can start to figure that out by following the story there. Dave.
And, in some cases too, like, I don't think we should be ashamed to tell clients, when we're using some of these tools to help us drive deep, thoughtful analysis. I know a lot of my clients, like, I'm sure they appreciate that I'm using these tools. Now, again, I'm not putting in their PII or saying like Matt Seitz did this, and this. But again, when I'm giving the context and then I'm helping create a lot of the analytics or the thoughtfulness of why we're making the recommendations, again, why wouldn't you want to use one of the most kind of powerful intelligence forces that we all have at our disposal right now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If I'm working with you, if you can use other tools to help be more efficient or make my plan better, why would I not want that? So, Dave, do you think that a lot of this, is it adjustment for the advisor on this end now just in the short term because it's new, or do you think that this is kind of impacting the client advisor relationship long term with these tools available?
No, I think it's here to stay. And I think the velocity is going to greatly pick up. And that's why, I wanted to do this podcast with you, Matt, last week when we were talking about this, because I want our advisors to be proactively thinking ahead of how this is going to change, disrupt, or augment the advice that they give to clients. Like, I use a service right now through Zox. And when a client sends me an email, Zox creates an AI response to that client. Now, it doesn't send to that client. It gives me the chance to proof it. And I found it's okay. I haven't used it a ton, but I like to see how the technology is developing and unfolding, and I'm sure it's going to get a lot better over time. But the reason that I say that is I don't think we're very far away from a time that our clients have a tool like that built into Gmail, built into Microsoft, built into whatever email platform they're using, that gives them the ability to almost fact check on demand or get perspective from an AI agent on demand when we're sending that client an email, or we're sending them an illustration to review, or we're making a proposal for an investment strategy. And so again, I think that's going to really kind of disrupt the traditional communication protocol between an advisor and a client. And so again, for me, I want to make sure our advisors are thriving 3, 5, 10 years from now at Prosperity Capital. And this is just something that we're going to all have to adapt to, which is why, again, I think that the more you can use some of these resources on the front end, it'll probably make things easier on the back end.
So to that point, Dave, how can advisors, anyone tuning in today, how can they keep training themselves or their team to be using these tools more proactively, either during or before the planning process?
Yeah, I think that, number one, it's just getting in there and playing around with it. Even if you're not a fast typer, the voice service is so great right now that you can just, speak to text. And, what I really would focus on doing is trying to use it to learn different perspectives or reactions for different topics. So think about anything that's meaningful to your business that's going to be a client interaction that maybe, is going to require them to put some thought to and then make a decision. I'll make a million examples up, but I want to recommend my client move $500,000 from their investment account into an annuity for some protection and guaranteed income. Or I want to reallocate my client's, mutual fund portfolio in their after-tax account to an SMA for advanced tax harvesting. Or I want my client to take $100,000 of their highly appreciated Google stock and donate it into a donor advised fund. These are all things that are big decisions for a client when it comes to their personal financial matters. And so one of the benefits is why not gain perspective from the AI? An example of that is, I might share with an AI agent, hey, my client has $2.5 million. They need 30 grand a year out of their investment accounts to support their living expenses and their lifestyle. They're in a traditional 60-40 portfolio right now. We're recommending moving this amount of money over to here. Here's why I'm recommending that they do that. Give them the reasons why. Here's why I feel like it better aligns with their plan. Here's some of the other things that they could do instead of doing that. Help me be a thought partner. Give me, validation on why this is a good recommendation, but also let me know if there's any blind spots that you can see, or if you were, to critically challenge this, what objections might I need to overcome? And then my last task to you is to help me put this into a client-facing communication so that I can simply help them see and understand this. And that exercise alone, it could take 10, 15 minutes, but if it's a meaningful decision for the client and it's meaningful for your business to earn that client, to win that client, to facilitate the transaction, it's probably a pretty good use of time.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the thought partner side too, because I know you and I have talked a lot about that, of not just putting in, hey, for ChatGPT, what are the recommendations if this is my client's plan or what I'm thinking about doing, but almost have that dialogue with me so I can think through what are the other options and what is more beneficial now versus long term, and if you've trained it on the now, soon, and later bucket. So I love that you've kind of gotten into the full using as a thought partner during that process.
Well, and Jason Smith actually taught me this, and I use it so much now. It's amazing. to assign different personas and then have them debate each other. So, for example, let's say a client sends me something on a tax strategy that I know is very far in the gray area, if you will, right? Like, I'll build 3 personas in ChatGPT, and I'll say, I want you to be kind of a thought partner to help me and my client navigate this tax investment that they're thinking about. I want you to take on, 3 personas. The first persona is the most rigid IRS examiner and auditor. The second persona is a CPA who is, highly intelligent, credentialed, and respected. And he understands, what's black and white versus what's in the gray versus, what's going to put you in jail. And then last but not least, I want you to take the persona of a promoter who's out there selling this strategy. And I want to watch the 3 of you debate about this strategy and then ultimately arrive at an outcome for my client that can be fully substantiated, that the IRS auditor is good with, the CPA is good with. And like, when you see kind of that magic unfold, it gives you such unique perspective to be able to then go share some of the relevant details with the client.
And that right there is a perfect example of why would your clients not want you using the tools that way? It's helping to bulletproof their own plan.
Exactly. Now, again, like, I've shared this a million times when I talk about AI, we need to be the subject matter experts. Like, again, even in that conversation, the person that I put as the persona of the IRS examiner or the CPA, like ChatGPT and these other services, they continually get tax law interpretation wrong. It's not one of their strengths right now. Maybe 2-3 years from now, maybe 2 months from now, as quick as it's moving, that it might be better, but it's directionally accurate, but you have to verify. So again, I would say don't just rely on it. As always, just like I'm telling our clients, don't just rely on it. If a client has a really magical idea about their finances that they come up with through ChatGPT, I should be the first phone call that they make to make sure it's actually legitimate and it fits into the client's, long-term strategy.
Great. Well, Dave, before we wrap things up, any last minute pieces of advice, feedback, or tips that you want to share with anyone tuning in today?
No, I think just, again, the tip goes into the more that you can leverage this on the front end, the less of the objections and the issues on the back end. It's like when Brian Bibbo and I teach Bucket Plan 2.0. For those of you who have attended it, or probably a lot of people on this podcast have, we always talk about the more education you can give the potential client on the front end of the planning process, the easier the client relationship is over the next 3, 5, 10 years, right? Because you're building a solid foundation. I'd say this is no different. Like, take the time to use these tools to help you really formulate or button up your recommendations. Even if it's not formulating, like, hopefully you are the person that's formulating the recommendations, but you can use these tools to button up the recommendations. Whether it's you're preparing for a client meeting and you want a brainstorming partner on the best way to approach a client, or whether it's you're drafting some analysis or recommendations that you're going to make and you want to send it to the client so that they can clearly understand the why. I think that is, it's so impactful. I was sharing with Calum and with another advisor. We had a client that had an older annuity, and because the annuity was issued in a rate environment where interest rates were really low, the interest rate on this annuity was really low. The caps were really low, but there was still a surrender charge left in the annuity. And so what I did was I went into ChatGPT. I gave the context of this client, how old she was. She was single. This annuity was originally put in her soon bucket. We were taking 10% penalty-free withdrawals out. It had a market value of $200,000. We put, an initial 250,000 in, so 10% of the initial deposit, gave her 25 grand a year as a penalty-free withdrawal. It had a surrender charge of, again, $185,000. It had a 2% cap on the S&P 500 and a 1.3% fixed rate. And then I'd put in there the options of 2 additional annuities that she could potentially surrender and replace it for. And I put in the specs of those new annuities, and I just tasked ChatGPT to run a completely independent analysis supported by math and internal rate of return on what the best approach was for the client. And it produced a great summary. And what it did was it basically, ruled out one of the annuities. It recommended the other one. And then it put together a very concise client communication for me that I took that client communication and I emailed it to the client and said, hey, we did some analysis on this annuity. Here's what we think you should be considering and why, and ultimately what our recommendation is. And that client read that and immediately responded back that just said, yep, this sounds perfect. Go ahead and send me the application. And so again, I think those are examples where the more that could I have just done a meeting with the client and verbally talked about it? Yeah, I could have. But then they might have gone and researched some of it on their own, right? Could I have just drafted an email myself simply saying, hey, we should replace this annuity and here's what, yeah, but it would not have been nearly as thorough. And so again, I think taking a little bit more time on the front end has the ability to save you massive amounts of time, energy, or frustration on the back end.
Fantastic. And yeah, I would agree. The more you use some of these tools, the more familiar you get with them, the better you're going to get with them. And for any of you tuning in with Prosperity Capital Advisors, don't forget a lot of these tools that Dave mentioned, we have available to you on C2P Central. Be sure to log in. We now have a one-stop shop with all of the different AI resources we have, recordings of our AI forums, the draft prompts, the other podcasts, most of them with you, Dave, the webinars and all of that in one spot on C2P Central. So be sure to check those out.
Awesome.
Thank you very much again, Dave, for joining us today and sharing those stories and feedback for the group. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Bucket Plan on Demand, brought to you by C2P, an organization whose purpose is to educate, train, grow, and support holistic financial advisors so families can achieve true prosperity. Subscribe today for the latest episodes and insights. Visit c2penterprises.com to learn how we can help support and enhance your advisory business. At the time of delivery and any subsequent publishing, information was deemed reliable, but is subject to change by the time of listening or viewing. The contents of this piece include options and projections of C2P, are subject to change, and are for informational purposes only. The information provided in this presentation is not intended to be individual investment, tax, or legal advice.